The crowd's roar deafened the Madison Square Garden as Muhammad Ali stepped into the arena, his presence commanding attention without effort. It was 1974, just months after reclaiming his heavyweight title from George Foreman in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle. Tonight wasn't about fighting, though. The champion had been invited as a special guest for a charity gala supporting children's education in Harlem. The event brought together celebrities, politicians, and wealthy donors, a collection of America's elite in their finest attire. Xavier Collins, a respected journalist known for his unflinching coverage of civil rights issues, stood near the press section. Unlike his usual professional distance, tonight he found himself emotionally invested. As the London-born correspondent for the Guardian newspaper, Xavier had developed a unique perspective on American racial politics. His award-winning coverage of Ali's refusal to be drafted into the Vietnam War had earned him rare access to the champion's inner circle. "Look at them all pretending they supported him during the draft controversy," Xavier muttered to his photographer. "Half these people called him a traitor 5 years ago." The photographer nodded, adjusting his camera. "That's how it always goes. Everyone loves a winner." As Ali made his way through the crowd, a young woman approached him. She wore a colorful African-inspired head wrap and a long, flowing dress with vibrant patterns, standing out dramatically among the sea of black tuxedos and conservative evening gowns. Xavier recognized her immediately as Amara Johnson, a promising poet whose work on black identity had recently gained national attention. Before she could reach Ali, a group of men in expensive suits intercepted her. One of them, a silver-haired senator known for his conservative views, looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "This is a formal event, young lady," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Not a costume party." His companions laughed, and the senator continued. "I know you people like to make statements, but there's a time and place." The woman froze, her expression shifting from excitement to humiliation as conversations around them quieted. The tension in the air thickened instantly. Xavier moved closer, notepad in hand, journalist instincts overriding his usual reserve. Ali, who had been engaged in conversation with the mayor, turned at the commotion. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation in seconds. Without hesitation, he excused himself and moved toward the confrontation with the same purposeful stride that had intimidated countless opponents in the ring. "Excuse me, Senator," Ali said, his voice carrying that distinctive Louisville rhythm. "Did I just hear you disrespecting this lady's beautiful African garments?" The senator turned, momentarily startled to find himself face to face with the 6'3" heavyweight champion of the world. He composed himself quickly, offering a politician's smile. "Just maintaining standards, champ. No offense intended." Ali's expression remained serious as he looked from the senator to the woman and back again. The crowd around them had grown silent, all attention focused on this unexpected confrontation. Xavier edged closer, pen poised above his notepad. He'd seen that look in Ali's eyes before, right before something memorable happened. "Let me tell you something about standards," Ali said, his voice both gentle and firm. "When I was in Africa, kings and queens dressed me in garments just like these. Presidents honored me with these patterns. But you wouldn't know about that kind of respect, would you?" The senator's smile faltered as Ali turned to the woman, and in a gesture that left the crowd murmuring, removed his own suit jacket and draped it over his arm. "Sister, your dress honors our heritage. It's this man's mind that needs altering, not your clothes." Then Ali did something nobody expected. He turned to face the entire room, commanding attention as only he could. "In fact," he proclaimed with rising intensity, "I think we've got it all backward tonight." With deliberate movements, Ali loosened his tie and removed it completely. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the most famous athlete in the world began dismantling his formal attire piece by piece. "The greatest injustice," Ali continued, projecting his voice so everyone could hear, "is forcing people to be ashamed of their culture to fit into yours." He rolled up his sleeves and stood tall. "Now who else here is brave enough to be themselves tonight?" The silence that followed was electric. Xavier Collins felt his journalistic objectivity slipping away as he witnessed the moment. He knew he was seeing Muhammad Ali transcend boxing once again, using his platform to challenge not just physical opponents but the invisible barriers of cultural conformity. The young poet stood straighter now, dignity replacing humiliation in her posture. And somewhere in the back of the room, someone started to applaud. The applause started slowly, a few hesitant claps that quickly gathered momentum. A young black pianist in a tuxedo stood up from his table, removed his bow tie, and joined the clapping. Then a famous actress of Puerto Rican descent rose to her feet. Within 30 seconds, half the room was standing and applauding while the senator and his companions remained seated, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Xavier Collins watched with growing fascination as the mood in the room transformed. His years covering social movements had taught him to recognize pivotal moments when they occurred. This was Muhammad Ali at his most powerful, not throwing punches but challenging America to confront its prejudices with the same directness he showed in the ring. "I'm not here to make anybody uncomfortable," Ali announced as the applause subsided, though his smile suggested otherwise. "I'm here because these children in Harlem deserve the same chances as anybody else's kids. But how can we tell them to be proud of who they are when we're telling their mothers to be ashamed of how they dress?" The senator attempted to regain control of the situation. "Now see here, Ali. Nobody's saying anything about shame. This is about appropriate attire for formal functions. Surely you understand?" "What I understand," Ali interrupted, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality he was famous for, "is that you looked at this beautiful sister and saw something to mock. What I understand is that you judged her worth by her clothes, not her character." A photographer's flash captured the moment. Ali standing protectively near the poet, his jacket still draped over his arm. The senator's face contorted in displeasure. Xavier made a mental note to request a copy of that photograph. It would perfectly illustrate his article. "Let me tell you something about clothes," Ali continued, pacing slightly as though he were in a ring. "When I visited Ghana, the president gave me a traditional kente cloth. In Indonesia, they dressed me in their royal garments. In every country I visit, I respect their traditions. That's what being the greatest means. Not just fighting the best, but respecting the best in all people." The young poet, Amara Johnson, had regained her composure entirely now. With Ali's implied protection, she addressed the senator directly. "My dress was made by my grandmother, who learned these patterns from her grandmother. Every color, every symbol tells our family story. I wore it tonight because I'm proud of that story. Just as proud as you are of your family's history, Senator Williams." Xavier scribbled furiously, capturing her words verbatim. He'd interviewed Amara once for a piece on emerging voices in black literature. Her poetry had the same quiet strength as her speech now, unassuming at first glance, but layered with meaning. The senator, sensing the room's mood had turned decisively against him, attempted to salvage his dignity. "Perhaps I spoke hastily. No offense was intended, Miss Johnson." Ali wasn't letting him off so easily. "You know, that's the problem with America right now. People say hurtful things, then claim no offense was intended. But words sting worse than any punch I've ever thrown or taken." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Xavier noticed several of the senator's previous companions had diplomatically distanced themselves from his table. The event organizer, sensing potential disaster for her charity gala, quickly approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner will be served shortly. In the meantime, please welcome our musical entertainment for the evening." As the orchestra began to play, attempting to restore normalcy, Ali did something even more unexpected. He turned to Amara Johnson and extended his hand in invitation. "Would you honor me with a dance, sister?" Her surprise was evident, but she placed her hand in his with a dignified nod. As Ali led her to the small dance floor, other couples hesitantly joined them. Xavier Collins tucked his notepad away momentarily and watched as Muhammad Ali, still in his dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves, danced gracefully with the young poet in her African dress. The contrast between them was striking. His 6'3" frame and her petite stature, his worldwide fame and her emerging recognition, yet they moved with mutual respect that transcended their differences. "He always finds a way to make his point, doesn't he?" a voice said beside Xavier. He turned to find Howard Cosell, the famous sportscaster and one of Ali's most vocal supporters during his boxing exile. "That's what makes him the greatest," Xavier replied. "He fights battles most people don't even recognize are happening." Cosell nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when they stripped him of his title for refusing the draft, I told him his career might be over. Know what he said to me? 'Howard, some fights are worth losing everything for.' Turns out he was right. About Vietnam, about racism, about all of it." As the dance ended, Ali escorted Amara back to her table, where her friends greeted her with supportive embraces. The senator and his group had discreetly relocated to a table farther from the main stage. Xavier checked his watch. The main program would start soon, and he needed to position himself for the best vantage point. As he moved toward the press area, he couldn't help but notice the hushed conversations throughout the room. Whatever else happened tonight, Muhammad Ali had already ensured this charity gala would be remembered for more than just the money it raised. The real drama, Xavier suspected, was just beginning. The evening progressed with the typical formalities of a charity gala: speeches about the importance of education, acknowledgments of major donors, and promises to create meaningful change. Throughout it all, Muhammad Ali sat at his table near the stage, occasionally leaning over to whisper comments to Amara Johnson, whom he had insisted join his table after their dance. Their unlikely friendship had become the evening's central narrative, overshadowing even the charity's mission. Xavier Collins found himself dividing his attention between the official proceedings and the continuing reactions around the room. The social dynamics fascinated him: how the power balance had shifted after Ali's intervention, how other guests now approached Amara with curious respect rather than dismissive glances. He'd witnessed Ali's influence in many contexts, but rarely had he seen it reshape a social hierarchy so quickly. As the event organizer announced a short intermission before the fundraising auction, Xavier made his way toward Ali's table. He needed a quote for his article, but more than that, he wanted to understand Ali's thinking. Why had he chosen this particular moment for such a public stand? "Mr. Collins," Ali greeted him with a wide smile, extending his hand. "I was wondering when you'd make your way over." "Still writing for that British paper?" "The Guardian, yes," Xavier confirmed, shaking Ali's hand. "Though I'm covering American culture more broadly these days, not just sports." "Good," Ali nodded. "Because what happened tonight wasn't about sports. It was about respect." Amara Johnson looked up at Xavier with recognition. "You wrote that piece on the Harlem Writers Guild last year. I appreciated your perspective." "And I admired your poetry, Ms. Johnson," Xavier replied sincerely, "particularly your piece Ancestors' Cloth, which seems especially relevant tonight." Ali looked between them with approval. "See, this is how it should be. People recognizing each other's talents, not judging by appearances." Xavier seized the opening. "That's actually what I wanted to ask you about, Mohammed. You've attended dozens of events like this. What made you take such a strong stand tonight?" Ali considered the question, his playfulness momentarily replaced by seriousness. "I saw something in her eyes when that senator mocked her. The same look I've seen in too many young people's eyes when someone tells them they don't belong somewhere." He paused. "I've fought too hard for my dignity to watch someone else lose theirs without doing something about it." Before Xavier could ask a follow-up question, the event was interrupted by the senator approaching their table. The nearby conversations hushed as people anticipated another confrontation. "Mr. Ali," the senator said stiffly, "I believe we got off on the wrong foot earlier." Ali turned to face him fully, his expression neutral. "Is that what you believe, Senator?" The older man cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I've been informed that Ms. Johnson is not merely a guest, but a contributing poet to the anthology being sold to benefit tonight's cause. My comments were uninformed." "It wasn't quite an apology," Xavier noted. The senator was acknowledging a factual error, not a moral one. Ali seemed to recognize the same distinction. "So if she was just someone's guest, your comments would have been acceptable?" The senator's expression tightened. "That's not what I said." "No, but it's what you meant," Ali replied evenly. "You see, Senator, that's always been the problem. Folks like you respect us when we entertain you, when we achieve something you can't ignore. But that basic human dignity, that shouldn't depend on whether she's published poetry or cleaned office buildings." The tension at the table was palpable. Xavier glanced at Amara, who sat with perfect posture, her eyes fixed on the senator with quiet intensity. The senator lowered his voice. "Look, I'm trying to make amends here. Must you make this more difficult than it needs to be?" "I don't make things difficult, Senator," Ali replied, his voice carrying despite his conversational tone. "I just refuse to make them comfortable for people who are used to their comfort coming at others' expense." Several nearby guests had stopped pretending not to listen and were openly watching the exchange. Xavier noticed phones had emerged from purses and pockets. This confrontation would be reported well beyond his Guardian article. The senator leaned closer, his frustration evident. Do you have any idea who I am? The committees I sit on? The legislation I control? Ali stood slowly, rising to his full height, though his demeanor remained calm. Do you have any idea who she is? The voice she represents? The future she's helping create? He gestured toward Amara. That's the problem with power, Senator. After a while, you start thinking you're the only one who has any. The silent standoff lasted only seconds. But to Xavier, it felt like witnessing two opposing forces of nature. The politician with his institutional power facing the boxer whose moral authority had been hard-won through sacrifice and principle. The senator broke first. I see this conversation isn't productive. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Ali. As he turned to leave, Ali called after him, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Senator, I'm still waiting for you to apologize to the lady. Not explain, not justify, apologize. The senator froze mid-step. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the servers had paused in their duties. Trays balanced as they watched the drama unfold. Slowly, the senator turned back. His political instincts must have alerted him to the optics of the moment. Dozens of influential people watching, some discreetly recording on their phones. Whatever his personal feelings, the calculation was clear on his face. He turned to Amara Johnson and offered a tight smile. Ms. Johnson, I apologize for my earlier comments. They were inappropriate and disrespectful. Amara met his gaze steadily. Thank you, Senator. I accept your apology. The senator nodded curtly and walked away, his posture rigid with barely contained anger. As conversations gradually resumed around them, Xavier turned back to Ali. You know you've just made an enemy on Capitol Hill, don't you? Ali's smile returned, mischief dancing in his eyes. One more won't make much difference. I've been collecting powerful enemies since 1967. Xavier couldn't help but laugh. Fair point. Amara shook her head in amazement. I can't believe you made a United States Senator apologize to me. I didn't make him do anything, Ali corrected gently. I just refused to let him walk away without facing what he'd done. The choice was always his. As the auction was about to begin, Xavier made his exit with a promise to send both Ali and Amara copies of his article before publication. As he walked away, he heard Ali telling Amara about his experiences in Zaire and the reception he'd received from people who saw in him a champion not just of boxing, but of dignity. Xavier made his way to a quiet corner to organize his notes. The story had evolved far beyond his original assignment to cover a celebrity charity event. What he'd witnessed was Muhammad Ali continuing his most important fight. Not for titles or purses, but for the recognition of every person's inherent worth. The evening was far from over, and Xavier sensed there was still more to come. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing with certainty. This story would not end with the final gavel of the charity auction. The auction proceeded with the expected pageantry. Luxury items donated by celebrities, weekend getaways at exclusive resorts, and priceless memorabilia, all offered to support the Children's Education Initiative. Xavier Collins watched from his position near the back wall, observing how the room's dynamics had shifted since Ali's confrontation with the senator. The wealthy donors seemed eager to demonstrate their generosity, perhaps aware that their social standing in this particular room now depended on more than just their bank accounts. When the auctioneer announced a signed pair of Ali's boxing gloves from the Foreman fight, a bidding war erupted. The price quickly escalated beyond what even Xavier, familiar with sports memorabilia values, would have expected. As the bids approached $50,000, he noticed Ali whispering something to Amara Johnson. She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. $75,000, called a tech mogul from the West Coast table. $80,000, countered a Wall Street executive. The auctioneer was about to close the bidding when Ali suddenly stood up. If I may, he said, his voice cutting through the excitement, I'd like to add something to this auction item. The auctioneer, clearly unprepared but unable to refuse the champion, gestured for him to continue. The winning bidder will get the signed gloves, Ali announced. But I'm also offering a private boxing lesson for any child of their choosing, and a poetry reading by Ms. Amara Johnson at their home or office. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ali had just significantly increased the value of the auction item, while simultaneously elevating Amara's status to equal billing with his own. $100,000, called out a new voice. Surprisingly, it was Howard Cosell, $125,000, countered the tech mogul. The bidding intensified with this new development, eventually settling at $200,000, a record for the night, and nearly 4 times what the gloves alone might have fetched. As the auction concluded and the formal program ended, guests began mingling again, many making their way toward Ali to congratulate him on his generous addition to the auction. Xavier noticed the senator and his remaining allies had departed early, their absence conspicuous. The event organizer approached Ali with tears in her eyes. "Mohammed, I don't know how to thank you. Tonight's total is nearly double what we raised last year." "Don't thank me," Ali replied, gesturing to Amara. It was this sister's courage that inspired everyone tonight. Xavier made his way closer, capturing this exchange in his mental notes. The story had become something more complex than a simple celebrity standing up against discrimination. It was about how a single act of solidarity could transform an entire room's energy and purpose. As the evening wound down, Xavier found himself sharing a table with Ali, Amara, Howard Cosell, and several others who had gravitated to their orbit. The conversation flowed naturally between serious discussions of civil rights and lighthearted stories from Ali's global travels. "You know what amazes me," Cosell said, gesturing with his drink. "How you managed to turn every situation to a greater purpose, Mohammed. Most men with your fame would have let that senator's comment slide. Not worth the trouble." Ali shook his head. "That's the difference between being famous and being responsible, Howard. Fame is what other people give you. Responsibility is what you do with it." "I still can't believe you gave up 3 years of your career at your peak," one of the younger guests said. "All those millions of dollars just to stand by your principles about Vietnam." "Some things cost more than money," Ali replied simply. "What would all those dollars be worth if I couldn't face myself in the mirror each morning?" Xavier noticed Amara listening intently, absorbing Ali's philosophy. She represented a new generation of voices, those who would carry forward the struggle Ali had helped define. "What will you write about all this, Mr. Collins?" she asked him suddenly. Xavier considered the question carefully. "The truth, as I saw it. How one moment of disrespect became a catalyst for something powerful. How Mr. Ali transformed a potential ugliness into beauty." Ali grinned. "Just make sure you mention I'm still pretty." The table erupted in laughter, the tension of the evening finally dissipating into genuine warmth. As midnight approached and the event space began to empty, Ali stood to make his goodbyes. He embraced Amara warmly. "You keep writing those poems, sister. The world needs your voice. And you keep fighting, champ," she replied, her composure briefly giving way to emotion, not just in the ring. As Ali moved toward the exit, accompanied by his entourage, Xavier fell into step beside him. "One last question, if you don't mind," Xavier said. "You could have handled tonight in many ways, ignored it, addressed it privately, made a simple statement. Why did you choose to make such a public stand?" Ali paused, considering the question with unusual seriousness. "You know, when I was a boy in Louisville, my mother had a beautiful dress she only wore to church on Easter Sunday. One day I asked her why she didn't wear it more often. She told me, 'Cassius, some people will always try to make you feel wrong for dressing like you belong somewhere special.' I didn't understand then." He gestured back toward where Amara stood saying her goodbyes. "But when I saw that senator try to make her feel wrong for celebrating her heritage, I heard my mother's voice." Ali looked around the emptying ballroom, his expression contemplative. All these years later, people still trying to tell others they don't belong. "Sometimes you have to make a scene to make a change." He clasped Xavier's shoulder warmly. "You write that in your article, Mr. Collins. Tell them the greatest said nobody should have to change their clothes to be treated with dignity." As Ali departed, surrounded by admirers even at this late hour, Xavier remained behind, watching the champion's retreating figure. In his decades covering significant cultural moments, he had developed a sense for when he was witnessing history being made. Tonight qualified not because of what had happened, but because of what would happen next. The story would spread beyond the ballroom, beyond his Guardian article, beyond even New York City. It would become another chapter in the evolving legend of Muhammad Ali, the champion whose greatest fights had nothing to do with boxing. Xavier Collins closed his notebook and headed for the exit, already composing the opening lines of his article in his mind. On a night meant to celebrate education, Muhammad Ali delivered a masterclass in dignity that left an arena speechless, and then transformed.